Module 6. Prohibitions. Which agencies are responsible for implementing prohibitions of arms transfers?
Well, it was basically one agency. It was the Export Control Policy Division at the Department for Economics. And that is the main point of contact for all licenses, export control licenses that you need in order to export arms, and is also responsible for the political process in order to get the license through or approved.
Are prohibitions contained in relevant legislation or policy guidelines?
Absolutely. We have the number one prohibition in our War Material Act, which is the national legislation on the export of arms, of conventional arms. And there, number one, it's written that you should not authorize any export that is in contravention to international agreements. So, which means that basically you can now quote the ATT directly as a means in order to avoid a transfer. But you also have the War Material Ordinance, which is more concrete and says that there are further prohibitions. Number one, the first prohibition is you cannot export arms if the destination country is involved in an armed conflict. Number two, if it violates systematically and seriously human rights. And number three, if there is a high risk that the weapons will be used against the civil population.
Is the information on prohibitions publicly available?
Absolutely, it's publicly available because it's a national legislation, and I can say that the practice really fits the national legislation, so there's nothing hidden about that. You can find it on the webpage of the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs. There you have a link to the national legislation, and there's also a non-official translation in English, which anyone can use as a template or in order to cross-check.
Does your state have specific legislation to implement UN arms embargoes?
We have the Embargoes Act, which is an act on the national, as part of the national legislation that is really meant to implement all the embargoes that are taken on the international level, but also on the national level. What is important? It is superior to the War Material Act, which means if there is anything prohibited under the Embargo Act, there is no export whatsoever.
How does your state interpret international agreements for Article 6, brackets 2?
Switzerland interprets widely, which means that there are many conventions that fall under Article 6.2, namely CCM, certain protocols to CCW, the Landmine Ban Treaty, etc.
How does your state interpret international agreements for Article 6, brackets 3?
For Switzerland, it's basically everything that's out there. So you can start with the Hague Conventions, go on to the Geneva Conventions, and especially one of the most important conventions is the Rome Statute.
How does your state interpret knowledge in Article 6, brackets 3?
The state concerned shall not authorize the transfer if it has reliable information that provides substantial grounds that the transfer would be used in the commission of the enlisted crimes. The first point is the reliable information that provides substantial grounds. Here we have to admit that you never have 100% certainty. It's always a question of intelligence gathering that is never 100% sure, but it's really about reliable information, which means reliable, does it make sense, is it coherent with the other information that you have, and also is it coherent with different information that you had for previous decisions. Now, I would emphasize that although we rely much on official intelligence provided by our intelligence service or by partner states, I would say that the most important information still is open source information. And if you can check that seriously and just check if it makes sense, then you've done already a good job.
How does your state ensure it does not authorize a transfer that is prohibited under Article 6?
Basically through organizational means, which means, number one, you consultate different offices for export licenses, which means you're at the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, you reach out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you also reach out to the Ministry of Defense, and you also consult the intelligence service. So that gives you a sense of different perspectives that you then can put together with all the different knowledges and the perspectives, like the human rights specialists, the international security specialists, the trade specialists, etc., etc. The second part is, of course, hierarchy, which means as a desk officer, you have to report to your boss. But then the more important the decisions are, the higher the decision-making instance will be, which means in Switzerland, the toughest questions go to the Federal Council, the Swiss government, which means that in the toughest cases, you have the highest standards of transparency.
Article 6 outlines the 3 sets of prohibitions contained in the ATT. States are prohibited from transferring conventional weapons if the transfer would violate obligations under measures adopted by the UN Security Council under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, in particular arms embargoes, would violate relevant international obligations under international agreements to which the state is a party, in particular those relating to the transfer of, or illicit trafficking in, conventional arms. If the state has knowledge at the time of authorization that the arms or items would be used in the commission of genocide, crimes against humanity, grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of 1949, attacks directed against civilian objects or civilians protected as such, or other war crimes as defined by international agreements to which it is a party. Therefore, states must provide information on whether the state prohibits arms transfers in the given circumstances, and in particular the relevant international agreements to which it is a party. States might also have other circumstances under which they prohibit arms transfer authorizations, and should share this information with other states too.